If you had told me a year ago that right now there'd be more people talking about the UFC's new BJJ League and the Craig Jones Invitational 2 than ADCC, I'm not sure I would have believed you, and yet here we are at the beginning of a new ADCC season, and it seems like the spotlight has shifted a little bit. Maybe not completely, but enough that we have to ask ourselves, what happened, and more importantly, what's next? Guys, it's Sean with PDMA, and today we are diving into the question, is ADCC still at the top of the game when it comes to no-gi submission grappling, or has one of the other leagues came in and taken its title? And in today's video, we are going to talk about the legacy of ADCC, as well as what's changed with ADCC in the past year with the implementation of things like the UFC BJJ, the Craig Jones Invitational, and various other tournaments. And I'm actually going to go over why I think ADCC still really matters and plays a really important role in the sport, but maybe not the role that it's played in previous years. So if you are interested in the future of professional submission grappling, go ahead and watch the rest of this video. And if you are interested in the jiu-jitsu and submission grappling community as a whole, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That helps me out a ton. Now let's get into it. So for the past several years, ADCC has really been seen by many as the pinnacle of no-gi submission grappling. Of course, there are other great leagues out there with great competitors, but in recent times, I think most people that are competing in no-gi jiu-jitsu, they're looking to compete at ADCC. And I think there's many reasons this came about. You can look at it from a competitor standpoint, you can look at it from the marketing standpoint, you can look at it from a lot of standpoints, but when you look at ADCC, what they're kind of known for is having, an invite-only tournament with very competitive qualifiers, even extending so much as to very, very competitive opens. And this all kind of culminated in what I believe is the pinnacle of ADCC, which was the 2022 ADCC World Finals. And if you were around then, you probably remember this massive production of a jiu-jitsu event. It really looked like no other jiu-jitsu event we'd ever seen. It actually almost looked more like a UFC style event than a jiu-jitsu event, literally down to the fact that Bruce Buffer was there. And this was also the year that Gordon Ryan really solidified himself as the greatest no-gi grappler of all time. That topic is a whole nother video, but, according to a lot of people, that's what happened. I don't know, maybe not. And for a lot of us, I think it felt like a very culturally relevant time in our sport. We had almost everybody in the sport either watching or competing or commentating on this particular event. And it also marked a time where jiu-jitsu was becoming a little bit more culturally relevant, specifically competitive no-gi jiu-jitsu. And we saw a rippling effect from this particular event. We saw people starting to wear ADCC gear, rash guards, shorts, t-shirts in your average gym. And it just felt like the culture of ADCC became the culture of no-gi submission grappling. But while everything looked great on the surface, there was a lot going on behind the scenes. And I think by the summer of 2024, a lot of those issues had been brought to the forefront of people's attention. And of course, we can't talk about the problems of ADCC being brought to the public's attention without mentioning Craig Jones. So obviously, he was a big part of the reason that a lot of these issues got brought up, but he wasn't the only reason. If you guys remember, there was a lot of people talking about these issues beforehand, and I think what Craig was able to do was kind of culminate all of those issues and really bring it to the public. And the issues I'm talking about here, and while there are quite a few of them that people talk about, I think the main ones that people were looking at was what the grapplers were getting paid. If you guys remember, there was no show money and there was $10,000 prizes and even actually less for the women. And then when CJI became a thing, there was all these rumors and that were pretty much later confirmed that ADCC was actually starting to block people from competing in CJI. And I remember specifically this very weird time of going online and seeing that so-and-so got an invite to ADCC, and then a day later I'd see, oh wait, no, they're competing in CJI, but now ADCC is bringing in this person and they're trying to justify all their qualifications. And it was very odd. And I think this is where ADCC made a really big blunder. It seemed like they were playing everything very reserved and they weren't being very open with the fans about exactly what was going on. And while that happened, they were leaving it kind of up to the fans to fill in the blanks and create their own narrative, or, as a lot of us did, just kind of going to listen to Craig Jones. He was out there talking about what was going on, and every once in a while you would have Mo Jassim make a statement, and specifically a couple times he did these Instagram lives that were just odd. But the point is, I think what happened was ADCC, in trying to play things close to the chest and trying to control the PR, just let people shape their own narrative about what was going on. And now, I've mentioned Craig Jones a couple times, but I genuinely do think it is difficult to underplay his role in all of this. And after all, CJI was formed directly in response to a lot of these grievances that a lot of these people had with ADCC, specifically grappler pay. Craig was very transparent about who he was going to pay, how much he was going to pay them, and then who could win these $1 million prizes, while ADCC was sort of fumbling around with, okay, we'll add a couple dollars here, we'll add a couple extra dollars here, we'll make sure so-and-so gets their own hotel room, things like that. Craig was saying, hey, it is $10,001 to show, and if you win, you get $1 million.
We're going to do 2 divisions and pay 100 times that amount of money to the division winners.
So $10K is the winner of ADCC.
And we're going to pay $10,001 to show up to that tournament.
And it would have been one thing if Craig Jones just put together a tournament and paid grapplers $1 million. I think that would have had an effect, but I think the real reason CJI had as much of an effect as it did was due to Craig himself. He was out there posting on social media, obviously the way Craig posts on social media, and it was getting a lot of attention, but I think, antics aside, one thing that people appreciated was that it was very obvious that Craig was being very genuine about what he was doing, whereas what we were hearing from ADCC almost kind of sound like more what you would hear from a PR firm, from a big company. What we were hearing from Craig just sounded like somebody talking to us. And I think after the hyper-successful inaugural CJI event, people did take a step back and say, okay, where exactly are we as a sport? Where exactly does professional submission grappling live? And fast forward a bit, while ADCC was still trying to recover from this whole thing that happened with CJI, the UFC made a real play at the jiu-jitsu market. And we're sitting here in 2025, and we just had the inaugural UFC BJJ event. We had the UFC Road to the title. And so now this massive company seems to be investing a lot of resources in no-gi submission grappling. And ironically, they're having their own issues with Craig, but I already made a separate video about that. I'll link it here so you can watch that if you like. And so now that I've beat down ADCC as much as I possibly can, let me tell you why I think ADCC still matters. And I think one reason is that for many people, ADCC is still the gold standard of no-gi submission grappling. Maybe not for as many people as it used to be, but there are still a lot of competitors out there that would still love to win an ADCC gold medal. And personally for me, when I hear that somebody won ADCC gold, that does still add an air of legitimacy to that grappler. And ADCC still does have a lot of strengths. I mean, it has the legacy, it has that ADCC brand, and that brand still does mean something. And we have to remember that ADCC is one of the major reasons that this sport was able to grow and become popular worldwide. Is it the only reason? Of course not. But they were a big part of that and still continue to be. And a big part of the reason for this is that they were one of the first companies to be able to turn submission grappling into this big spectacle and this big event that people would watch. And now, I know there's a lot of issues with ADCC having such a big production. Whether they should have done it or not is a topic for another video. However, the fact is, they were able to turn jiu-jitsu into a big production, unlike any other league had really been able to do. And that production might not seem important to somebody like me or you who's just watching this for the jiu-jitsu, but for the casual fan, that does a lot to air legitimacy to this sport. It brings in a type of fan that might not have watched otherwise, because I've watched a ton of jiu-jitsu that takes place in some big event space where there are 16 mats and I'm watching all these people compete at once. And for me, that's great. But for a lot of people, they need the show. They need this to feel like a professional sporting event. And ADCC was able to bring that. And it's also worth pointing out that now that they've done that, that is slowly starting to become the standard. Maybe not as grand of a scale with like drummers and stuff, but obviously CJI put on an amazing event. The UFC BJJ seems to be doing this as well, and all of that kind of started with ADCC. But all of that production is kind of irrelevant if they don't evolve with the sport, and I think they do need to make some major changes as we go forward. And so now we get back to the question, what is ADCC's role in the submission grappling community moving forward? And personally, I think that comes down to how they handle this evolving landscape that our sport finds itself in. And I think if I were working for ADCC, I'd be asking myself a bunch of very tough questions. How do we connect to the fan base? How do we allocate funds in a way that not only works for us, not only works for the grapplers, but works in a way that the fans are okay with? Because that was a huge driving factor that chased people away from ADCC when people started figuring out how much these grapplers got paid versus how much ADCC was paying for the production. And if I just had to take my guess here about how this all shakes out for ADCC, I personally think they're going to end up in a similar situation as the current IBJJF. And now for the purposes of this conversation, I'm talking just about IBJJF no-gi. We'll leave the gi for a separate video. But I think that I could see ADCC filling a similar role where IBJJF still has amazing tournaments, they still have amazing competitors, and winning an IBJJF gold is still very prestigious in our sport. However, I don't think IBJJF are the ones pushing the sport forward in a way that ADCC once was. And so I kind of see these other leagues taking the lead and pushing the sport forward, sort of taking the reins from ADCC, while ADCC still maintains some cultural relevancy and is still a very respected organization, however, simply just not playing the role that it once did. And now we are at the point of the video where I say, nobody cares about my opinion. I want to hear your guys' opinion. What do you think about the current state of ADCC, and what role do you think ADCC plays going forward? Guys, let me know in the comments. If you guys have never been in my comment section before, I think I have one of the best comment sections on YouTube. We have some great discussions down there about submission grappling, so let me know in the comments. And if you guys found any value in this video and you're interested in more submission grappling news, match breakdowns, and anything happening in the world of competitive jiu-jitsu, please click subscribe. That helps me out a ton. That being said, I just want to say thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.